Welcome to Perimeter Institute. Welcome everyone this morning to our Inspiring Future Women in Science conference. My name is Kelly Foyle and I'm a physicist and I'm a member of Perimeter's educational outreach team. It's tremendously exciting to see a room like this filled with young women who are curious about the world, passionate about science, and eager to make important contributions. We also have additional guests watching the session today on our webcast, including a group at West Humber Collegiate Institute in Toronto, organized by teacher Mahfouza Rahman. Thank you to all of you joining us here and also to our online audience. You are the future of women in science, and this conference is about you and for you. I'm eager to hear all of your comments and questions throughout the session. As I walked around, I saw lots of people who are excited about science and who made longish journeys this morning on the bus. And it's great to have all that energy in the room this morning. To start our session off this morning, I would like to have Dr. Rob Myers, Perimeter's director, to come and welcome all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, and good morning, everyone. Really great to see you here. So, I know I'm not the person you came to see, but I did want to take a moment to welcome you all here to this year's edition of Inspiring Future Women in Science. This conference is one of those special things that we get to do here at Perimeter, and it's something that is special to me personally for many reasons. The first one is that I'm a dad, and I have 3 wonderful daughters, and they've all had the opportunity to sit where you're sitting now. Second, as a scientist, a researcher, a teacher, a mentor, I've had the opportunity to work with many young people over the years. And something that I know is that women may not have the loudest voice in the conversation, but they do have ideas. They have great ideas. They have ideas that we cannot do without. And then lastly, as the director, one of the great things about my job is I get to talk to people from all over about the research in all different kinds of areas of physics and science more generally. And I get to take a broad view of things. And so what I see is a time of enormous opportunities and great possibilities in science. But it's also a time of great challenge for science. It's a time when we need all of the ideas. Science isn't going to thrive if we only tap into a small fraction of the talent pool. And so, as you sit here today, listening to all our great speakers, as you move forward, making all those choices that young people have to make, and whether you find your passion in science or medicine or engineering or mathematics or something completely different, I want you to remember 2 things. The first one is speak up, and the second one is the future needs everyone, but especially the future needs you. And so with that, I'm just going to say, enjoy your day here at Perimeter, and I'll get out of the way.
Thank you, Rob. We have an exciting morning ahead. We're honored to have 20 amazing and inspiring women who have followed a STEM career with us here today to support and contribute to this event. We're also expecting that the Waterloo Member of Parliament and House Leader in Ottawa, the Honourable Barda Shager, will join us later in the morning and will mingle and share her insights on her work and life in elected public service. Altogether, they represent over 200 years of work experience in their fields. Although that may make us feel a little bit old, hopefully it will encourage you to learn as much as you can as they share their stories on how they pursued their paths and offer you advice and food for thought on your career ahead. In the next few hours, you're going to have the opportunity to learn as much as you can from the experience of women who have come before you. Much of science, too, involves building on the work done before and learning from the experience of others. In the spirit of understanding and learning from what has come before, I would also like to acknowledge that we are located on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. Perimeter Institute is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to 6 nations, which include 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. As a young woman living in Canada, you are impacted by all that has come before you, but you also have the opportunity to learn from the experiences and perspectives of a truly diverse community. I encourage you to ask questions and remain open to the thoughts and reflections and wisdom of others while considering your own path for the future. Throughout the morning, we've tried to give you as many opportunities as possible to ask questions and talk directly to the speakers and panelists and mentors. Please make sure you take advantage of this opportunity. This day is about you, so your participation and questions are really central to making this morning a success. We'll just briefly go over how the morning will work. Soon we're going to hear from 2 of our 3 speakers. After each keynote speaker, we're going to be followed by an opportunity to ask questions. After the first 2 speakers, we're then going to have a panel discussion. The panelists will discuss their lives as STEM professionals, but most of the discussion will be driven by your questions, and we'll try to also fit in a little moment here for you to take a stretch break. The panel discussion will be followed by our final speaker and questions, and then we're going to say goodbye to our online audience and move out into the atrium for our speed mentoring session. This is an opportunity for you to talk in small groups with women in a variety of STEM professions. The mentors are really excited to share their experiences with you. There's a lot ahead, so let's get started. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Varuna Prakash. She's an engineer turned doctor, currently in her 2nd year of internal medicine residency at the University of Toronto. She previously worked in the field of human factors engineering and healthcare, interning for the World Health Organization and Massachusetts General Hospital, among other local institutions. Here to tell us more about her self-described scenic route through engineering and medicine is Varuna Prakash. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here, thrilled to see so many excited faces in the audience. So when I was thinking about what I could talk to you guys about today, I asked myself the question, what would current Varuna say to the Varuna who was at your age and your stage of life, looking ahead to making big career decisions? And I thought of basically 2 things. So first is, Varuna, don't spend so much time on the Backstreet Boys versus NSYNC battle. That is not worth your time. And very true, years later. The second is, Varuna, you are going to become an engineer, you're going to become a doctor, you're going to travel the world, you're going to publish papers, you're going to win awards, you're going to do everything that you wanted to do, and you're going to end up feeling this deep sense of professional fulfillment all the way down to the tips of your toes. You're going to get there, but it's not going to happen in the nice, linear, beautiful, straight path that your guidance counselor told you about in grade 12. Instead, it's going to look a little bit like this. I don't know, you guys are seeing this here. Sorry, are you guys seeing? There you go. So it's going to look like that loop-to-loop right there. So a lot of twists, a lot of turns in the road, a lot of doubling back, a lot of mistakes. There's going to be failure. There's going to be uncertainty. There's going to be a huge sensation of feeling really, really lost at multiple points. And that's okay. That's totally fine because you'll still get there. That is what I would have told myself when I was in your shoes, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I'm going to tell you about where I grew up, where I've been, what I'm up to now, what I'm looking ahead to the future, and I hope that these little pearls of wisdom will help you as you start your own little careers, or big careers, I hope, in STEM fields. So let's go back a little bit of the Wayback Playback machine here. This was me as a kid in 1998, way before you guys were born, and I was a kid growing up in India, and that's how I spent most of my time. So my nose was always in a book, my head was in the clouds, and I spent all of my time lost in fantasy. I loved words, I loved literature, I loved to read. I really didn't like math. In fact, I was terrible at it. I didn't really love science, and I thought I wanted to be a journalist, or I wanted to be an author of some sort. I wanted to be a British author, very specifically. And I had no idea what any of those things meant, but certainly becoming an engineer and becoming a doctor was never on my radar. And I say this to you because I think we dichotomize ourselves really early. So we separate ourselves into left brain versus right brain, or artist versus scientist, or creative versus technical, when really we all contain multitudes, and we can carry those multiple parts of ourselves into our future lives and our future careers very easily. So my parents moved around a lot, and because of their jobs, we moved with them. So I moved to a different city every 3 years of my life. And that meant every 3 years I was starting at a new school, I was making new friends, I was getting to know a new place. And that was really cool and really exciting, but it was also pretty tough as a kid, as you might imagine. This photo here is from Hong Kong, which is where I moved when I was 11 years old. And somewhere in the middle of all those moves, I skipped a couple grades. So I was 11 years old in grade 8. I was 2 years younger than everyone else. I felt like I was 5 years behind on puberty. I was socially awkward. I was shy. I had no self-esteem. And I'm not saying these things so that you feel sorry for me. I'm saying them because if you've been there, and if this has been your experience, I totally feel you. I was there. And I promise you that it gets better. It does. It really does. It gets better. But the reason I also say this is because just to give you a sense of how school became my refuge. So I threw myself into my work. I loved school, I loved studying, I loved classwork. And the reason was that it became my safe space. And it became a space with no judgment. And the only expectations I ever had to live up to were my own. And that's how I really started loving the sciences. I started loving math. I started loving every subject that I could get my hands on. So, long story short, we moved on from Hong Kong, we moved to Toronto. I finished high school here, and once again, I was faced with this question of what to do with my life. I was in the same shoes that many of you here today are, which is trying to figure out what to apply for in university. And one of the stressors about growing up, moving every couple of years, is you don't really have a lot of time to figure out what you want to do, because you're spending a lot of time just trying to stay afloat and trying to integrate into every new setting that you find yourself in. So, and I was an immigrant, so I had no role models or mentors or speed mentoring sessions where people could point me in any particular direction. So I employed the tried and true shotgun approach to applying to university. So I applied to journalism, I applied to life sciences, I applied to something called space science, I'm not sure exactly what that is, and I applied to engineering. And I managed to get into engineering science at the University of Toronto. And back then, and I think possibly even now, that was one of sort of the really competitive engineering programs to try to get into. I had no idea what an engineer was. I had no idea what a job in engineering looked like. And I decided, hey, this looks like it's really hard, and I can always switch into something easier, so here we go. I don't recommend, don't do as I do. I don't recommend that approach to university education. But that's what I did, and that's the program I started. So I started at engineering science, and I started off my first day with a lot of excitement, as all of you will have on your first day of university. And unfortunately, things didn't go as I had hoped. So I thought long and hard before putting this slide up here. And I see some laughs in here and some ooh. Yeah, that's how bad it was. I felt like I showed up on day 1 and I was 6 weeks behind. I felt like the subject matter was so theoretical, and I'm a very practical person, so it wasn't a great fit for me. I had no idea what was going on. I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose every single day of that year, and I just couldn't keep up. It sucked. It was disastrous. And these were my grades. This is a photocopy or a screenshot of my transcript, and I've never had C's and D's on my transcript before, so this was a huge shocker for me. I felt like a complete failure. I felt a deep sense of shame. I felt like I'd let myself down, let my family down. I'd let down everybody who had these great expectations of me. And It's interesting, even today when I post this here and I talk to you about this, I feel this sort of red hot sense of shame bubbling up in my chest. And if I could crawl underneath the stage and run away, I would. But looking back in retrospect, having this failure and having it so early on in my career was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. It's going to happen to all of you guys, maybe not in the same way, but every person in this room who has an established career has experienced a failure of some sort, whether it's grades, whether it's something personal, you name it. Everyone has experienced failure. And the act of going through and contending with those emotions of shame and picking yourself up and moving on is something that you can't learn. You just have to go through it. And having gone through this so early on was absolutely monumental to the rest of my professional development. And I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't failed so spectacularly back then. So what did I do? I took the summer off to recuperate and reconnect with my thoughts and figure out what I really wanted to do. And I ended up switching into materials engineering. And I started the fall again at the University of Toronto in my second year of materials engineering, and it was way, way better. This time the material was practical, I loved the content, I became drawn to biomaterials and biomedical engineering, which exposed me for the first time to healthcare. And the work of working on problems and solutions that directly improve people's health and improve people's lives and improved our healthcare system was such a big motivator for me. As I started getting more passionate about the work, my grades got better, my social life improved. Suddenly, it became really easy over the next 3 years to keep up with school and to enjoy what I was doing. I felt passion for the first time. I ended up graduating near the top of my class through materials engineering, not because I had substantially changed and not because I magically gained 50 IQ points over the last year, but just because I simply loved what I did way more. At the end of my materials engineering undergrad, I once again had some difficult decisions to make. So I realized I was really drawn to healthcare, and materials was wonderful, but I wasn't sure if it was the right field for me. I wanted to be working somewhere where I could connect with people and I could work on healthcare problems. And I didn't know if I wanted to go into the workforce or if I wanted to get a PhD or if I wanted to do something else entirely. And once again, I had a lot of uncertainty and I was pretty lost, and I did the whole shotgun approach one more time. So I got into a PhD program in the States, and then I made a backup application for a master's in biomedical clinical engineering here in Toronto. And I remember this moment distinctly. 15 minutes before my decision was due, I declined my PhD offer and decided to go all into the healthcare option. And I have never turned back. Since that moment, I have been thriving. I love my work. Healthcare drew me, it intrigued me. The problems were complicated and complex, and there were so many of them. And my skills were put to excellent use in various healthcare settings. This began the part of my life that I call the yes and era, because I said yes to every opportunity that came by. Again, not very wise, but in the formative stages of your career, actually a really good thing. I applied for and got an internship at the Massachusetts General Hospital, so I gave up my apartment, I recycled all my possessions on Craigslist, and I moved to Boston. And I did this internship at Mass Gen where I was exposed to technical challenges I had never thought of before. I emailed someone at the World Health Organization and asked them if they might have an internship for me. I never expected they would say yes. 6 weeks later, I get a reply in the email saying, yes, can you start next month? So I get a 70-liter backpack and throw some clothes in there, and I move to Geneva, to Switzerland, and I start an internship at the World Health Organization. The internship itself, not great. The organization was in a lot of chaos. There was a lot of conflict. My boss ended up losing her job. So for me, the work itself wasn't super productive. But it didn't matter because the experience was phenomenal. So I spent every hour of the day that I could attending talks, everything from plague to SARS to TB to vaccination programs. And these talks expanded my worldview beyond anything I could have hoped for. I spent my weekends traveling around Europe and meeting people from every walk of life. And that's learning I couldn't get anywhere at university. It was one of the best times in my life. I came back to Toronto and I took on a full-time job at the Centre for Global eHealth Innovation, which is a really unique place located out of a hospital, the Toronto General Hospital, where they solve some of healthcare's most wicked problems with technology. So I was working on medical devices and trying to improve their usability, trying to make them safer for doctors and nurses and patients to use. And I loved every moment of it. This picture here is an app called BANT, which is an app for young adults with type 1 diabetes to manage their blood sugars better. A very old cell phone, obviously, but now this app is actually in use. It's being trialed, and it's being used by hundreds of adolescents with type 1 diabetes, fully integrated with their glucometers and other pieces of home medical technology. So this was fascinating. And at this point, having spent a couple of years working in the human factors business, in the medical technology business, I realized I wanted something more. I loved my work in engineering, but I wanted to be one-on-one with patients. I realized I wanted to provide direct patient care, and I wanted to be the leader of a healthcare team while bringing in my experience with medical technologies. I wanted to be able to generate problems from the clinical environment that I saw, and then using my skills as an engineer to solve those problems. Around this time, one of my mentors gave me this great quote: "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there." So up until now, I'd been kind of meandering, I'd been kind of lost, I'd been falling into things more so out of chance rather than out of purpose. And around this time, when I was working in this position, I took the time to actually sit down and think about not a job description, not a place of employment, but to think about what my values were, and to think about what I actually wanted to do with my time. And all roads at this point led me towards applying to medical school, and that's exactly what I did. So applying to med school in Canada, as you may have heard, sometimes feels like trying to win the lottery. It's a very, very competitive environment. And I had that albatross around my neck of those horrible grades from first-year engineering that you saw before. But if anyone tells you it's impossible, don't believe them. There's always a way, especially if you've done things to overcome your failures, if you've done other productive things like internships, like jobs, like publications. If you've done other things and moved past your failures, they will not come back to haunt you for the rest of your life, which is what I was worried about. I joined medical school in 2013 at the University of Toronto, and I haven't looked back since. This is a photo of my ID badge from residency. So I'm currently an internal medicine physician, resident physician, and I'm working towards a career potentially in critical care or intensive care. And I love this picture because the badge on the left is me on my first day of residency. And I just look terrified, like I don't know what I've gotten myself into. And the badge on the right is me on my first day of my second year of residency. I'm a senior medical resident at this point. I'm a little delirious because I haven't slept in 26 hours. I pulled a night shift on this one. But I'm happy. I'm thrilled because I finally found the type of work that I love to do. And I feel that deep sense of contentment all the way down to my toes. This hasn't been without its challenges. So medicine is an all-encompassing field. It's 10 years of really hard work at minimum. It's 10 years of working really, really long hours, being away from your family, trying to combat burnout at every step of the way. It's 10 years of physically grueling work and emotionally demanding work. But it's also a field that I can't imagine myself doing anything but. I love it for the autonomy that you get. I love it for the complexity of the problems that you get to diagnose and manage. I love that I can control my time and I can bring in other aspects of my identity, like teaching, like being a teacher, like being an investigator, being a researcher, being a scientist, being an engineer, being an entrepreneur. I can combine all of that with my clinical practice. And most of all, I feel really, really fulfilled in my role as a physician providing direct patient care. So I am absolutely in the right place, despite getting really, really lost at multiple points along the way. So I'm going to close by just reading you a short quote by one of my favorite feminist authors, Rebecca Solnit. And she has written this great book that I recommend to you. It's called A Field Guide to Getting Lost. And everything I've described for you today is about me getting lost at a lot of key forks in the road and still making it through okay. And Rebecca Solnit describes being lost as actually being something beautiful and being something productive and enabling discovery. And she says, to not to know how to get lost brings you to destruction. And somewhere in the terra incognita in between lies a life of discovery. And this I find really true right down to this day. So I'll end it there. I'm happy to take questions. I wish you all the best on your own adventures, and I hope you get a little bit lost along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Varuna. Again, if you have questions, please come up to the mic and form a line. But I had a question that I wanted to ask you about your talk. When you were in engineering and you said you had this desire to go into healthcare, or you were thinking about the PhD versus the master's program, was there anything that inspired you to be interested in healthcare? How did you, what sparked your interest in the field?
Yeah, I remember the exact moment. So one summer I did a short internship at a hospital at Princess Margaret, which is a famous oncology hospital in downtown Toronto. And I worked on a project on radiation therapy for patients with cancer. And it was my first time being in a hospital environment and looking at how technologies played a role in the hospital environment and how patients got care through those technologies. And that was probably the first time I was exposed to direct patient care, and I loved it. And that's what made me switch paths.
Awesome. All right. Oh, we do have a question. Come on up.
Hi, my name's Annabella, and I'm from KCI in town.
Hello.
And you spoke a little bit about how when you were younger you were interested in arts and science, like literature. And I was wondering if how you balance those interests, and if like you still do something related to those, like childhood interests in like writing or things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, I grew up writing throughout my childhood. So through elementary school, through high school, I wrote for multiple student newspapers. I carried that on through undergrad engineering as well. It's actually quite easy to write and publish if you're motivated and passionate to do it, because you have self-publishing platforms and you will always have an audience if you want to. I find the harder thing is to actually find the time and the discipline to write purposefully. So when I have to admit, in medicine and through residency, I've kind of taken down the creative aspect a little bit. I've gone dark on the creative writing front, mostly because my time has to be devoted towards more technical forms of writing or the medical and clinical work itself. But I do, I journal quite a bit, and I've started using my journal as motivation for more creative pieces. I haven't published any of those creative pieces yet, but that's just a matter of time and sort of discipline, not so much any other barriers. So absolutely there's a way to do it. And I have a number of colleagues who publish creative writing in medical and non-medical journals while going through residency. So if it's a priority, you absolutely can make it happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Varuna.
Thank you.
And we'll have a chance to ask your questions again. Our next speaker, Cather Simpson, joins us from New Zealand, where she is the director of the Photon Factory and professor of physics and chemistry at the University of Auckland. Her research explores the interaction of light with matter, particularly how materials can convert light into more useful forms of energy. Cather is a leader in exploring how recent advances in the physics of light may transform our ability to feed the planet safely and sustainably. Please join me in welcoming Cather Simpson.
So I am a university professor, as she said, and that means I teach a lot of people who are just slightly older than you. So I tend to teach classes that are like first-year chemistry, first-year physics. If any of you guys go into science of any sort, if you've got general education requirements, you'd be sitting in a large classroom similar to the ones that I lecture in. And one of the questions I often get asked is, why should I become a woman in science? Like, why? What's in it for me? And so I thought I would come up with a kind of top 10 reasons to be a woman in science. And these are a little bit, well, we'll just go through them. So, number 10, science is male-dominated. And man, those hot guys, right? I mean, that guy up there on the your left, he's not too bad, but he turned into that guy over there, right? So this is kind of a joke, but this is real. So the very first time I ever got invited to give a presentation in my field, which is chemical physics, that's the invited speaker list. So they got all the invited speakers together and said, let's take a picture. Can you identify me? Yeah. So at this conference, this is one of those conferences where you go out and you have dinner with people and they bring their partners with them. And every time I'd sit down, the woman sitting next to me would say, oh, so what do you do? And I would say, well, I'm a scientist, right? She just assumed, or he, that I was married to the person I was sitting next to. So I always sat next to the best looking one. I'll let you figure out which one that is. Actually, the thing about this is that I now work with quite a number of those guys. And some of them are my best friends. You know, I can go to them, they support me. They write letters when I want to be promoted or get an award. One of those guys wrote a letter that helped me become a fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand this year. And so maybe what I should be thinking about these days is about the allies. So people are becoming much more aware, men in particular are becoming much more aware that women are on a different playing field when it comes to science and engineering than they are. And they're becoming much more comfortable at helping lift us up, at helping level out that playing field. The explosions, number 9. How many of you guys love explosions? I should say only one of these should you do at home, and I hope you know which one it is. Lithium and water in the middle, don't do that. And of course the fire on the table. Very exciting, but maybe not in the right way. This is my favorite explosion. So I worked at Sandia National Labs as a scientist when I had just gotten my PhD, and it turns out this experiment was going on the same facility, and I didn't know about it. And if I had, I would have leapt over. What you're looking at there is generation of X-rays and plasma. So you essentially, you plug something into the wall, you charge up these big old capacitors, and then you discharge them through the little tiny wires that she's putting in that sort of spool of thread. Each one of those wires is about a tenth the size of a human hair, and her job was to go in and line them up and put them through there, and you put all that charge through, and that picture is just the electrical discharge. It's just the fluff. That's not even the main amount of energy. Very, very cool. So this is about things like generating fusion so that we have more electricity that's more green. Very, very exciting. So explosions, very cool. The science is amazing. Oh, recognizing bias. How many of you guys have experienced some sort of bias? Oh, look at that. See, this is what gives me hope for the future. When I was your age, I was the only girl in my entire baseball league. There were parents that would say, get that B word off the field. And I still would have told you I didn't experience bias. There was no gender bias in my life. So the thing that gives me hope is that you guys recognize it. My kids who are 17, both boys, they recognize it. How do you recognize bias? Well, like this. So sometimes it's really easy. You know, you look at an advertisement for your lab coat and it's like, yeah, I look really good in my lab coat. You would never see a man's lab coat advertised this way or this way, right? I mean, this is pretty easy to recognize. This one's pretty easy to recognize too. You know, so here's a Nobel Prize winner that in 2015 basically said, I don't want women in my lab because first of all, I fall in love with them or they fall in love with me. And then if you criticize them, they cry. Oh my God. He said this at a Women in Science thing. Older than you guys, but oh my goodness, what a nut job. Right? There are things like this. And patronizing. You know, you get somebody that pats you on the head and says, oh, good job trying that really hard math. You know? But I tell you what, people recognize it. You guys recognize it. We recognize it. Men recognize it. He lost almost every position he held because of what he said. And that is so much more common, and the Me Too movement is making it even better, okay? Recognizing bias is the only way to defeat it. When I got hired, I was hired with Mary Barkley. She was a senior person, and I was just straight out of my postdoc, so I was like 25 or something. And I got hired into this chemistry department at Case Western Reserve, just across the way from you guys, in Cleveland. And we were the first women ever to be hired in our department. And this is what they put in the newspaper. You know, they hit the jackpot. And one of my colleagues from the medical school called up and was like, "Is she single?" And I'm thinking, no, you're supposed to be calling up and saying, "What kind of great science does she do? Can I collaborate with her?" Right? But I tell you what, Mary Barkley became the head of that same department. And I now direct a laser lab that has $25 million in funding, 50 people working in it. We do spin-out companies, we work for the dairy industry, we do laser stuff right at the fundamental science. How does energy get transmitted from light to molecular degrees of freedom? It's really, really fantastic. And this guy, I love this guy. So he's also a Nobel Prize winner. Won the Nobel Prize in Physics. He's now the Vice Chancellor at the Australian National University in Canberra. He came to our university last year and he gave a talk. He is considered a male champion of change because his goal as Vice Chancellor is to level the playing field across, okay? So one of the things about this, number, I forget what we're on, 7 or 8, recognizing bias, is that we all have biases too. This is not a male problem. And he said a really interesting thing at this presentation. He said, I want equal opportunity at every level within my university. I want women to have the same opportunities and the same success stories in engineering and science as men do. And I want to have, in my executive assistant pool, the same opportunities for men. Ooh. Executive assistants are almost always women. If you go into most universities, most facilities, even the Perimeter Institute, you're much more likely to find a woman in a staff position than you are in an academic position, right? And so somebody after the talk actually went up to him and said, well, if you want to open up opportunities in executive assistant positions for men, won't that undermine women's abilities to succeed there? And he just paused. Right? Because that's what they used to say about women. Women used to take, you're going to take a man's job, and he won't be able to support his family. And so for me, that was a moment where I realized I had a bias. I also had been slightly uncomfortable. I'm like, holy crap, that's like when I get on an airplane, and I'm a little bit surprised when the man goes out and serves coffee and the woman goes and flies the plane. It doesn't mean that I think that women shouldn't fly planes. It just means that inside, without thinking about it, I have underlying biases. The only way to get rid of those is to understand them and acknowledge them and learn about them. And that's what he's trying to do. So learning about bias, okay, that's not very exciting. This one I like a lot. Man, if you're a woman in science, this is changing, and I'm glad it's changing on some level, but on another level, I like being able to go into a physics conference and not have to wait in line at the bathroom. This is a science fair, and those guys on that side, the right, are all waiting in line for the bathroom, and look at her, she's like, haha. Because how many times do you go to the mall and it's like there's only 4 stalls and there's a line, or the airport, oh my God. You get to work with animals. How many of you guys like animals? Like the idea of working with animals? Mostly they're dead. But that's okay. That's okay. So this is the colossal squid. This is the colossal squid, and this is actually in the museum, the National Museum in New Zealand, which is where I live now. And a fisherman caught it, and it died. They kept it on ice, and they're getting to study it. My very first research project was looking at how immunoglobulins, antibodies, the things that give us immunity from diseases, how they get across the gut lining. So in some mammals, you get your initial immunity from your mother's milk. And inside the intestinal lining is a receptor that changes its shape with pH. And that was fascinating. I was basically 2-3 years older than you guys, and I got to study how that works in real animals. Very, very cool, make a big difference. It can be a really good life. Being a scientist, being an engineer, being a doctor, all of those fields, you're very well trained. People want you. You have control a bit over your schedule. Even if you're a member of, say, a technical staff at a research lab or something like that, or a national laboratory, there are now rules in place about maternity leave and so on. These are my kids. So I have 2 boys. They're actually your age now, and I like these pictures because they're teenagers, and this reminds me why I love them. But, we've had a great time. And I've had the ability to have kids to raise a family and be a kick-ass scientist, which is what I love. Yay. Okay, so some people don't think that scientists or engineers, you should use the word geek or nerd, that somehow that's bad, but actually I'm like, embrace it. You know what I mean? I'm not worried about being cool. I'm worried about learning all kinds of fun things and doing all kinds of fun things. And so if you have pictures like this in your past, so this is me in like first grade, I'm in the math league, woo! You know, then embrace it, go for it. You know, here's a guy, his name's Jake Martin. He's now getting his PhD at Cambridge. That's his wife. So she was also working in our lab, and he proposed to her by using our lasers to write, "Louise, will you marry me?" That, you know how tall that is? That's smaller than the diameter of the average human hair. And he was so excited that he took a laser out to dinner, so he developed this, he had this whole plan. He took her out to an island and blah, blah, blah. He had a laser, and you see that the top of the Y? It's got all that nanostructure in it. When you put a laser on it, it sprays it like a hologram. Her only comment was, thank God he didn't actually propose in the lab. Right? So embrace it. He's now really happy and excited. This is one of my favorite scientists. She's actually an engineer who became a doctor. We've heard a bit about that story. Her name is Catherine Moore, and she's in Silicon Valley. The Da Vinci robot is a surgical robot that she helped invent. If you ever want to hear an inspirational speaker, Google Catherine Moore and TED Talks. She does TED Talks. But she's fantastic. Now, we've done projects with them. So it turns out with the Da Vinci robot, you can't do surgery, bone surgery, at the end of one of those arms because it's all about rotating through a really small keyhole incision. And it's hard to generate the pressure. And if you use it like a sawing motion, you generate a lot of heat. So we use laser pulses that are so exotic that they don't generate heat. And so we've had projects with them where we're designing exactly the type of laser pulse that you need, delivered at the end of a fiber, that we can snake down those robotic arms that you see there and do surgery for bones and sinuses and things. Really, really fun. So I run a lab called the Photon Factory. I started out, when I was you guys, I was going to be a neurosurgeon. So I wasn't somebody who had trouble deciding what path I was going to take. I just changed my mind all the time. And so I was going to be a neurosurgeon, and obviously I didn't wind up being a neurosurgeon. Now I run a laser lab, and I get to do all sorts of things like probe the fundamental nature of light-matter interaction. I have a company that sorts sperm by sex for the dairy industry, so I'm actually occasionally in the newspaper. My team calls me the sperm queen. My boys are a little embarrassed about that. But it's really, really fun. I study things like in your blood right now, you know, your blood is really red. That means it interacts really strongly with light. But you don't want it to do anything with that light. You just want it to carry oxygen from your lungs to your tissues. And so in your blood, the molecule, that hemoglobin, has designed evolutionarily the way to absorb all of that light and then get rid of it really, really fast. 50 millionths of a billionth of a second. Incredibly fast. Very, very useful for us. This is our sperm sorting company. So it turns out for her to give milk, which is what the dairy industry wants, she has to have a baby. But not all those babies are the same. If you're a dairy farmer, you don't want a whole lot of male babies. You want to be able to turn the dial so that you get all females, and that's what we're trying to do. So this is what our technology looks like. So the chip in the middle there, we make using lasers and photolithography, it's called. It's actually like Jell-O mold. You know, we just make it in different shapes with tiny little features. The cells come in, we identify which ones are carrying an X chromosome and which ones are carrying a Y, and then we use a laser to move them into different channels. And I can show you how that works a little bit. So there's a laser coming down from the top, and there's particles coming in from the side, and you can see that when they go through our laser beam, they essentially get knocked into a different laminar flow stream. And if we put a Y junction, that means we can collect the ones that we want and leave the ones that we don't want there. That's really exciting. We now have a company that's commercializing that. So what do? You know, lasers, milk, and sperm, that's all of our applied stuff. That's really fun. So we study the really fundamental stuff, but we also get to have an impact. And for me, it's the people I work with. So this is a picture, you guys might appreciate this. This is this time of year last year in New Zealand. It wasn't below freezing all week. It's very green. Of course, we're in the southern hemisphere, so our seasons are reversed. But these are the people that I work with. And for me, as a university scientist, this is actually what drives me. We heard Varuna talk about following your values. I love working in a university because I'm like a point guard. In fact, when I played basketball, I was the point guard. I love passing the ball to somebody else and then clapping when they score. I don't need to be the one that's on the front. You know what I mean? And so for me, a university job is all about helping these guys succeed. So actually, I've done 3 and 4 all at the same time there, right? So you're a nerd, and it's fun to explore being a nerd or an egghead. What's the number 2 reason? Well, the door is open. Okay, here's one of my favorite quotes. So this is she was a professor at Maryland, and she said, right now I have to go around obstacles to get where I want to go as a woman and scientist, but by the time my daughters are around, I want doors to be open. I want them to be able to go straight in. And the fact is, and this took me 15 minutes of internet searching, all of the programs that are out there, programs exactly like this one, that are helping you make connection, helping you talk to scientists, helping you discover what you want to do, and hopefully helping you realize that even though if you Google scientist, it's much better than it used to be, but it used to be that all you got were pictures of white men, that there is a place for you here. And so I would say the door is definitely open. It's up to you to walk through it. It's not going to be easy. Nothing that's worth it is. And it's not like you're never going to have any trouble and you're never going to experience harassment or you're never going to experience bias. Of course you will. But it's up to you to go in and walk through that door and be persistent and get what you want out of it. And so the last thing I would say, the number 1 reason to be a scientist, and you've heard this a little bit from Rob actually, is that you can make a difference. So there are lots of problems facing us right now, global problems. Clean drinking water. It's hard to believe, but there are many places in the world where you can't just turn on a tap and get a glass of water. We're running out of fossil fuels. That's actually kind of a good thing because all the fossil fuels that we've burned have induced climate change. And so we've got problems with climate change that need to be fixed. We need to be able to harness energy from the sun better. All sorts of things. We need a more sustainable world. And that's where you guys come in. We can't do that unless people like you guys are the ones that are going to solve those problems, and we need all of you to be thinking about that and thinking about how you're going to contribute. So I see this is the face of the future, right? And that's where yours should go. And I think I'll stop right there.
Down to the mic for questions for Catherine. Really inspiring talk. I love the hot guys slide. So maybe just, do you want to tell us a little bit, if I had a question for you, it would be just tell us a little bit about what it is that your work, what do you do? Like, we heard about the sperm and the dairy cows, but what does a typical day look like for you?
So a typical day for me actually doesn't involve, these days, a whole lot of time in the laboratory. So that's one of the weirdest things about having a science career in academics. You spend your time learning how to research and learning how to do all this stuff, and if you do well, you eventually get kind of promoted out of that. So my job these days is to help those guys succeed. I call it giving them brain candy. So we have tons of projects in that space. We have people who are developing handheld sensors to identify skin cancer. We have people who are developing stress sensors. We have people who are studying how light and matter couples to one another. And my job is to help give them the tools that they need so that they can explore those types of projects themselves, help teach them what they need to know, help teach them how to be a scientist, and then essentially give them money and let them go.
A couple of questions?
Hi, so I'm Farzana, and I go to Victoria Park. I just wanted to ask, like you said, you mentioned how you had really empowering figures in your life that kind of motivated you throughout, and then but there might have been also negative reactions or comments. So what really motivated you personally to get inspired and go on this journey that you went on?
So I would say initially I was really motivated by the puzzle-solving aspects of science. And a lot of my early science was really about trying to understand. I got fascinated at one point by how energy moves around. So, light is a way to carry energy. It interacts with molecules and gets absorbed. I mentioned the thing about the hemes. That happens in your blood, but on your eye, that light gets converted to rotational motion. And so initially it was that puzzle-solving side of it. I was really slow to recognize bias myself, and I think that's pretty common for people in my generation. You guys are doing much better, and I think that's fantastic. The people that helped me were the advisor that I had when I was a first-year undergrad. I said I was going to be a neurosurgeon. I took this class, and the professor said, would you like to come do an internship in my lab? And I said, I don't know how to do that. And he said, of course you don't. That's what we're here for. And so he supported me all the way. I didn't have a lot of female figures at that time. You saw the invited speaker list, but I did have a lot of men who thought that I was really good at what I did and supported me. Now, that's not to say that I didn't have some negative times. I had to remove someone from my committee because he literally chased me around the table I did a math problem right, and he's like, "Oh, that's great," and he didn't stop. And then I got up and he kept, and I'm like, no, this is not on, buddy. But you learn how to deal with that, and you learn how to deal with that adversity. You learn how to understand that it's not always going to be smooth. You're not always going to be the kind of up-and-coming young thing that gets all the praise and the A's and everything, and you work through it. And it's, I used to think that being smart was the most important thing in being a scientist, but I think actually it's about persistence and drive.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eva. I'm from Waterloo, Oxford, and I just want to know, what do you got to do to be like a university professor or do research, and what's the difference between them?
That's a really great question. So there are a lot of places where you can do research. So you can do research in labs, you can, like national labs, you can do research in companies, and you can do research at universities or facilities like this, which isn't really a university but is affiliated with one. And there's almost a spectrum in going from, say, doing research in an industry, like if you were to go do research at BP Oil, versus, say, doing research at the Perimeter Institute. The spectrum is about how much flexibility you have in choosing what you work on, okay? And that's something you have to decide yourself. I am really bad at being told what to do. I'm not very good at it at all. It's something I had to recognize early, and so for me, university was a bit better than working in industry. But some people really love to do research. I have a guy in my lab right now who really loves to do that research, but he doesn't want to be me. He wants to have projects that are more laid out for him, and then he does it. The path to getting to any of those places is to go first to university. Now, people will tell you you have to get a Bachelor of Science, but I'm standing here telling you that's not true because I have a Bachelor of Arts, and I took a whole lot of history, I took a whole lot of civilization, lots of languages, not enough to get a Bachelor of Science. You then do, if you want to go work in a company, you can actually, straight out of university, you can apply, and they can train you up, okay? That's a bit of a challenging path, and your trajectory will be a bit lower. Do you know what I mean? If you go, after you get your Bachelor of Science, and you do a master's degree or PhD, then you're doing a more self-directed body of research, and then your career trajectory is often a bit, you've got a bit more of an upward slope to it because you've got more training and more independent thought. Again, you can work at a national lab or a company, or go into academics. If you want to become a professor, depends on where you are. But there's typically a period of time where you're pre-tenured, so you go do your PhD, you go do what's called a postdoc where you're working with somebody else, and then you go apply to, say, a university, you become an assistant professor or a lecturer, you work your tail off, and then eventually you get tenure, and then you become a professor.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Oh yeah, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Paige. I go to GDHS, and my question is, if you're working in a lab, what does a typical day in the lab look like?
So if it's like, say one of my team members on Engender, which is the sperm sorting company, is working in the lab. They'll come in, they'll have a set of problems that they've been thinking about. So right now, one of the problems that we're thinking about is how to orient sperm inside of a microfluidic channel. Right? So it turns out sperm are really shaped weird. I didn't know this. I wasn't a sperm expert before I started this project. And so 10 microns by 5 by 1. So a human hair is about 100, right, just to calibrate you. And then they've got a tail. And the way we tell the ones that have an X chromosome from the Y chromosome is we stain them, and then the X chromosome is a bit bigger than the Y chromosome, so the females are a bit brighter than the males, which I'm sure you will all appreciate. What that means, though, is that if the cell is really shaped funny, if it's coming at, like, say you guys are the thing that's measuring the fluorescence, the glow off of these cells to tell whether it's X or Y, if it's at you that direction, it's going to look really different from that direction, and that small difference between X and Y gets smushed out. So right now, my team is trying to just figure out how to better orient those cells inside these channels so that they can better measure things. And that means they go into the lab, they have a set of goals, big term goals that might be 3 months long, and then they have to figure out how to break that down into individual steps. That often means they have to build stuff, they have to buy stuff, they have to say, hey, I need to try to put this in a different medium, or I need to change the shape of the microfluidic channel, and then they figure out how to do that. So it's really, really fun. I like to think of it as Legos for grown-ups, right? You've got a kit, you want to build, the Death Star, but actually you really want to build a Death Star with feet because you want it to be able to walk a little bit on its own. And that means you've got to pull in other things, and you've got to figure out how to make it robotic and so on. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll take one last question.
Hi, I'm Brenna. I go to Vaughan Secondary, and you were mentioning at the beginning that you wanted to be a neurosurgeon, and then you were always changing your mind. So I was just wondering, how do you narrow down all those options until you found the one that you were truly passionate for?
So actually, I thought the first speaker said it beautifully. If I look back on my career, it looks like a straight line because I see the decision points. If I look forward, it's squirrely like this, And I would never change any of the decisions I made that didn't get me to where actually, that comes out totally wrong. All the decisions I made got me to where I am today, but I did things like I turned down a really competitive MD, PhD fellowship. I don't think anybody's ever done that before because it's so competitive to get one. They give out like 7 in the country or something. And I was like, no, I don't think I want that. And everybody thought I was making the wrong decision. Maybe I would make more money now. Maybe I'd be a famous doctor now. But for me, I love what I'm doing right now. I'm happy where I am, and that was the right decision. So you have to trust yourself, and you have to realize that when you make a decision and it looks like you've made the wrong one, you just think your way out of it. You don't ever stop. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cather. So we're now ready to start our panel discussion. I'm going to invite the panelists to come up and join me on the stage now. This is a good opportunity just to take a quick little stretch as we wait for them to join us. In this session, we're going to go a little deeper into some STEM career paths, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay, I think we'll get started, so please settle back in. We're fortunate to have 4 panelists today with us representing a real range of different specialties and work experience. You'll see a description of each of them in your program. I'd like to first thank all of them for joining us today and taking the time to share their experiences. To start off our session, I'll be asking each panelist to tell us a little bit about themselves and their career path. I'll be moderating the discussion, but I hope that the questions for the panelists will be coming from you. So even as they're introducing themselves, feel free to form a line at the microphone. I can certainly ask lots of questions. These women are really fascinating, but I hope that we'll be having lots of questions from you today. So Kona, let's start off with you.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Kona, and I see dead people. Actually, literally, I do. I'm a forensic pathologist and a coroner. I trained all over the country. So that means I'm a medical doctor, and I do autopsies, and I figure out how and why people died. It took a long time. To be a specialist physician at my level, it's 14 years of post-secondary education. So after high school, you do 4 years of 4 years of undergrad, so it's a science degree. You do 4 years of medical school, then you do 5 years of pathology residency, and then because I wasn't quite educated enough, I went and did a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology to end up where I am. So it is a very long haul. But I wake up every morning and I love what I do.
Awesome, thank you. Shirley?
Hi everyone, it's great to be here and see so many young faces. I'm Shirley Tan. My Chinese name is Xiao Wu. I grew up in China. I did my undergraduate study in China as well, and then I come to the States. I got my PhD at MIT, and then I said enough is enough in school. So I went to work in industry. I went to Silicon Valley, worked for 3 years. And then I said, okay, maybe school is the best place for me. So I went back to academia. I did a postdoc at Stanford, and then I got my position here at the University of Waterloo. Now I'm a professor of chemistry in the Waterloo Institute for Nanotechnology, and I'm also Associate Dean of Science Research currently. And I do a lot of services. I cannot name all the committees that I served in. I think, in summary, I like to work with young people. I think that's what makes my life very energetic. And I like working in my lab, creative things, solving problems, and I'll be happy to share with you my excitement today.
Thank you. Camille?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Camille Mitchell. So when I was your age in high school, that's when I was trying to figure out what it is I wanted to do. And I went through I called the A phase. I initially wanted to be an archaeologist, then advertising, and then I settled with architecture. So by then, I wasn't too familiar with what an architect did. So my high school had an opportunity to do placements during the day. So I would spend half the day at a firm. And then through practical experience, you got an idea of what is required to be an architect. And that's when I was referred to the University of Waterloo. So you guys are really fortunate that you guys are in the Waterloo region with Conestoga, Laurier, and University of Waterloo with the co-op placements. Because before I even graduated, because that's the thing, I know many friends who went through different programs, not fully understanding what they were doing, sort of the all shot, what was described by Verena, let's see what it is and see what sticks. With Waterloo, I had 5 placements in different firms before I even finished my undergrad. I worked in New York. I was training students that were completing degrees from Harvard. They were like, let the Waterloo students show them what to do. So following that, so upon completing my undergrad in Waterloo, that's when I sort of realized the whole issue of diversity and lack thereof, especially for Black women in architecture. But at that point, I was still committed to this degree. And so I've completed my master's degree at Waterloo, and I work in Toronto at recently up to a really large firm. They completed CG across the street. So right now I'm really involved in promoting diversity and mentorship and retention for women in architecture, and also encouraging platforms for outreach for visible minorities within the profession as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Camille. Daniela?
Hi, I'm Daniela. I studied mechanical engineering, and while I was still in school, I found out about a problem that affects wind turbines in cold climates. And while I was in my last year of engineering, I started working with a group of friends on a system to improve production for these wind turbines in cold climates, and have been working on that since. So after I graduated, decided that I was going to form that into a company. I'm now the CEO of that company. We've been operating for roughly 4 years and have validated the system that we designed.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniela. Okay, well, hopefully we'll have a line-forming stream of questions, but maybe I'll start off. Camille, you talked a little bit about high school, but I wanted to hear maybe also from some of the others, thinking back to where these girls are now. When you were in high school, what inspired you to pursue science? Was there a teacher? Was there a moment? What inspired you in high school to pursue a science career? Kona, do you?
I was always that little geeky kid, you know, that would have seashells and categorized, you know, stuffed animals and all sorts of things in my room, you know, whereas everybody else is playing Barbies. And it was really important to have people recognize that one and encourage it. You know, I was really lucky to have my dad, because he didn't quite understand me. He didn't really know where I came from. I was the only science-y person in my entire family. There are no doctors, there are no scientists in my family. So they were all very confused by me, but at least my father recognized something a little bit different, and he encouraged that instead of trying to squash it. So then when I was, you know, grade 9, grade 10, you're starting off high school, you're not really sure what it is you're going to do. I took all sorts of things. I took Japanese. I got to go to Japan for like 3 months. So I highly encourage people to step out of their comfort zone, because Japanese is a lot different than French and English. But I still always sort of gravitated back towards the sciences, which is something I really enjoyed. The reason I am where I am now was because of all the decisions I'd made, through grade school, high school, university. You have to combine what you're good at with what you love to do. And if you can put those two together and make that into a job where somebody pays you to do that, that's probably the best place to be, and that's exactly where I am right now.
Awesome. Any other thoughts that?
I did my high school in China, so the experience is quite different. The curriculum is quite fixed, not much choice. I have 2 daughters, so my older daughter is already in university. I watched her go through the high school over here. I would say you guys are very lucky. You have a lot of choices to pick what you like. If I think back from my own high school experience, I think it's just natural interest. It was very natural for me to go science and engineering because that's what I want to do. I wasn't really interested in literature. One thing I decided at the end of my high school is like, I'm not going to be a writer or anything. So there's multi-facet in you. You have to kind of, I would say, just feel what you like. And one thing you have to understand is don't let other people to tell you what you like. That's the lesson. Because a lot of my classmates, female classmates, girls, they don't like what I like. So I'm kind of different, but just follow your heart. If you like it, just go for it.
I would also add for my high school experience, the 2 disciplines I really liked were really celebrated. So I was always strong in visual arts, but also mathematics was celebrated. So we'd write the Pascal, the Descartes, the Fermat math competitions, and there would be plaques in the halls. So it's that recognition that was, that again was celebrated in the school. And also with the visual arts, to have that balance. And also did French immersion on top of that. So the school really organized how to have that balance, is what I appreciated, and I was able to take all those different aspects with me into my career and adult life.
Anything to add?
I wanted to do all sorts of things when I was in high school, just like everybody. And I was never a very smart kid, and I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. And my parents kind of saw that. They ended up putting me in this all-girls school, this private school, which gave me a lot more confidence, which really helped. And then I ended up going back into the public school system. But I knew that I liked math, and I really liked helping people. So I thought about being a doctor. I thought about being a nurse. I applied for all of these things when it was time to go to university. I applied for accounting, actuarial science, engineering, hoping that I would get accepted to something and then I would have my choice. But I got accepted to most of them, so that didn't really help. And then I kind of narrowed down on engineering and was looking at, I really wanted to move to Vancouver to go skiing in the winter, and UBC had accepted me for engineering, so I decided to go with that.
Awesome. Thanks. Question, yeah.
Hi, I'm Ava from Meadowvale Secondary, and I wanted to ask all of you, how does someone in secondary school or fresh out of high school get practical experience or find someone who can give them that practical experience? Because it can be hard without any qualifications or any ins.
Ask. You know what? You have a voice, and you're standing right there, and you're asking. Don't be afraid to use that. That was probably one of the biggest hurdles I faced when I was your age. I was just thinking, well, nobody's going to take me seriously. I don't know anything about what it is that they do, but it sounds really interesting. Ask. You guys have email, you guys have Facebook, you have Twitter. Most of us are probably on Facebook and Twitter. And that's how I get a lot of my requests from people. Like, I'm interested in what you do. Can I come and learn a little bit about it? The worst that can happen is, either somebody says no. And that's okay. But chances are, if you use your voice and you ask, and you're not afraid to ask, somebody's going to get back to you. And that person may be your person, or they may be somebody who'd be like, you know what, I don't think I have what you're looking for right now, but I know somebody who does. So that for me, I mean, if I had known that when I was your age, like who knows, maybe I would have been on Mars or something, but ask.
Awesome, thank you. We've actually had a couple of questions come in from our online audience at West Humber. And so one of them is, how do you balance your personal life from your professional life? How do you strike that balance?
I like what I once listened to a talk by Jeff Bezos, the boss of Amazon. He pointed out, right, it's actually not conflict, personal life and work. It's just two faces of your coherent life. They're not any different. I would just say go back home, deal with my kids. It's just a different challenge from going to the lab and solve a problem. You just need time management and just say, okay, maybe today this one is higher priority than the other, and the other day maybe the other side is more important to more urgent things to deal with. I don't want you actually to think those are conflicts. There are moments you have to choose which one to deal first, but everything should be a harmonic piece in your life.
Yeah, it really helps if you enjoy what you're doing, then it's not as much a choice between work, professional life, and personal life. But I always, my work recently has been very stressful because our company's made some huge steps in the last year, and we've been negotiating an agreement with a very large company, one of Canada's largest companies, for purchasing systems and for an investment. So it's been a really stressful year, but there's always things. I love working with my team. We're really close, and it kind of feels like, when we go for lunch together, it's really fun and gets your mind off of it. And I've also decided to learn how to play the violin, which I started in May. And it's nice to go to violin or practice my violin and just take my mind off of everything. So it's good if your professional life is something that you really enjoy doing, and then it's good always to remember the things that you care about and do things for yourself.
I would just like to add, I think for myself, it's just recognizing that balance is difficult and acknowledging that, because I have my professional career, I have my personal life, but then I took on a series of volunteering programs and outreach and managing and all these different things. So what I've had to learn is just to know your limits and also ask for help, learn to delegate, because you may love organizing this event. It may be easy for you to do this. It's natural for you to do this. You did it 10 times before, but it's okay to let it go and also ask for help, because there's always people willing to help, and it's not your responsibility to uphold everything. And I think with learning how to balance, I think it's part of the process. And it's not necessarily you cannot have it all, but just be mindful of which parts are more important to you. And I think Verena was saying yes earlier, but the year of yes, I said yes to many things, but now it's for myself, what's more important and how to go forward with those instead of taking on everything at one time.
Awesome. Yes, question.
Hi, my name is Surindi, and I go to Abbey Park High School. And before I ask my question, I just want to thank you guys for sharing your stories. They're super inspirational and cool. And like a lot of you, I'm in high school and I have no idea what I want to do. But I know I want to do something in the sciences and business related. So specifically to Daniela Roper, I was wondering, after completing your undergraduate at the University of British Columbia, what were the steps you took to get out there and start your own business? Because I know it's tricky and there's a lot of risk to put in. But what did you sort of do to just get out there and show your idea out?
That's a good question. During the process when my team was designing the system, when we were still in our engineering program, we worked really closely with wind farms to understand what they had tried, what worked, what didn't work, and to get feedback on our design. And one of those was willing to work with us afterwards, and from a lot of them we had really strong feedback of, if you built this, we would buy it. And that kind of encouraged me to continue to actually start the company. But I had no business experience, which was really scary for me. And I didn't have an office, I didn't have any money. So I applied for Velocity, which you might have heard of, is at the University of Waterloo, or it's out of the University of Waterloo. It's in Kitchener. They have, I think, about 80 companies in there right now, and it's free office space, and they give you mentoring. So I applied for that program, thanks to my sister, she was already in it, and was lucky to get in, and that really made the whole thing so much more real. That's when I started working on the project full time, and I had people telling me, you're doing this right, you're doing this wrong, things that I didn't know I was doing wrong. And also there's so much funding. We're lucky in Canada with how much funding there is for young people starting companies. So I was able to get enough funding to file a patent and to hire some co-op students and then eventually hire my team on. And so far I've had enough government funding that I haven't had to give up any share of my company. So I still own the company completely. And another big part of that was pitch competitions, which is something that in the Waterloo region we have quite a few of.
Thank you so much. That really helps.
Hi, my name is Valeria Repnikova, and I'm from Assumption College. You all look beautiful today, by the way. Professor Tang, if that's correct, I was wondering, you got into MIT. What made you stand out of all the other competitors? Because I understand that it's extremely difficult to get into such a prestigious university.
Well, I did really well when I was in undergraduate study, but I don't really think I stand out that much. I would see half is through hard working, right? You have to do well, you have to love what you do. The second half is also opportunities. Now I address both sides. What makes you hardworking? Partly it's work ethics, the other part is always the passion. So you have to be passionate about what you do. That makes the work much more efficient, I would say. You get wonderful ideas at just being passionate. Now, being opportunities, I think I was lucky to get to MIT. There are particularly professors looking for students with certain background at that time. I happened to be a good fit. But how do you look for opportunities, I guess, right? One is open mind. Don't look just like, I just want to go that route alone. Look more fundamentally what you like to do for your life. Like, I want to research. I want to be able to build instruments. I want to study life forms. I want to me, anything related to biomedical, physical sciences is my interest. So I end up looking broad, a lot of opportunities. And then the other thing is build your qualifications, right? I want to be a good scientist. What fundamental qualities should a good scientist have? Your logical thinking, critical thinking, be able to really dig into a problem and actually be persistent in solving the problem. And by building those qualities, when opportunities come, you can seize the opportunity and really become part of the effort or route that you'd like to go on.
Thank you.
Maybe it would be interesting to hear a little bit about some of the challenges that you guys have faced in your career. So maybe, or a moment of frustration, where has been a sort of a pain point along your path? If there is.
Well, I'm First Nations. So my dad is Cree, my mom's Mohawk. And so I kind of faced all those barriers all the way through. And I still do, which, really sucks. It's hard when you have people telling you, on one hand, you shouldn't be here. You know, you don't deserve to be here. You're not smart enough to be here. I don't want to be treated by somebody like you. And then you have other people, you know, the other half of it saying, well, you only got here because, you know, or it's great that you did this, but, you know, you didn't get it by merit. So it's difficult to have those, you know, challenges put on you on top of being, you know, a woman in science and medicine, when you have all that stacked against you. You know, and it's easy to feel really alone when you're kind of facing that. But, you know, if you look inside and you think to yourself, you know, okay, there are a whole bunch of people telling me that I cannot do this. Why are they telling me I can't do this? And if their why isn't anywhere near as solid as your why, then you pick the one that's stronger. And chances are it's going to be your why and what's inside of you that's stronger than what everybody else keeps telling you. Because they don't see that why, they don't see that inside of you. And as you grow and as you get older and as you face more challenges and you overcome them, that why becomes visible to other people, and you just let that sort of speak for itself.
I think a challenge for me was demanding my recognition as an architect, because understandably it's a white male dominated profession. So beyond the architecture profession, when you're on site, the contractors, the engineers, they're heavily male dominated profession. So initially, when you go on site for a building this size, it is an intimidating process, because besides gender and race, it's also age. I'm quite younger than a lot of the contractors who are on site. So having to literally have a group of 12 to 20 men on site waiting for your direction was an intimidating process, but it goes back to Catherine's presentation about having a good set of allies and people behind you and knowing what you say. There's a team of people backing you up at the end of the day. So I think one of my challenges was the confidence to be recognized as the architect on site and making the decision, but at the same time, knowing that I can rely on a good set of allies to help and support my decisions and back them up.
I can relate to that. Mm-hmm. The wind industry is very male-dominated as well, and from the beginning, when I started the company, I've been going into meetings with wind farm owners and operators, and it's always older white men. Mm-hmm. And I think in the beginning it was tough for them to take me seriously, because I'm this young woman that has designed the system, and they would say, well, how could you have done this when the OEMs for the wind turbines haven't designed the system, and why do you think your system is going to work? So it was challenging, but at the same time, there are many people in the industry now that are champions and that are very supportive. Another challenge, I think, I had a lot of self-doubt and I wasn't very confident, in engineering, I first of all wasn't very smart. I never had really good grades. I was accepted mostly on my extracurriculars and how diverse I was, I guess, but they had us take this Myers-Briggs test, which is a personality test, and my personality was, I think it's ESFJ or something like that, but it's like a very caring personality type, and it's someone that recommend you to be a nurse. And then they showed this graph in our engineering class of the people, like the distribution of these Myers-Briggs personalities in the regular population and then in engineering. And mine was fairly common, 16% in the regular population, 0 they had seen in the students that had come into this engineering program. And I kind of thought, wow, I have like a 60-50 average, my personality type is wrong, maybe I should just stop studying engineering and do something different. But I'm really glad that I decided to keep working at it, because I do really enjoy engineering, and I love the knowledge that I gained from engineering and the things that I can do and build now from what I learned, so yeah.
Maybe the problem isn't that you weren't the right fit for engineering, but engineering needs to encourage more people of different personality types to be part of engineering. Yes. Yes, question.
Hi, my name is Sri Cherry, and I go to Abbey Park High. And I was just wondering, so we've learned a lot about how you've become where you are and the decisions you've made, but what are some things that you could do in your free time that you would recommend to us that would like really help us like get more interest in what we want to do? And it's not only like an extracurricular club, but it's also something that you enjoy and you can have fun doing as well.
My suggestion would be to find what it is that you like to do and do it, because you can take that into any profession. I literally design buildings, so if we have architects who have different diverse backgrounds, they can bring that knowledge in. So instead of us waiting on the clients to tell us about physics and how to shape this space, if they have an interest in physics, they can tell us how that. We're meeting with architects, indigenous architects, to design smudging spaces so that it's mindful of their spaces and how to use those spaces appropriately. Ballerinas, artists, so you can bring what it is that you like to do into your profession and execute that happily.
And variety too. So step out of your comfort zone. If you're like, I am not good at chess, but I've never really tried it, I just think I'm not good at it, go join the chess club. You know, if you're like, wow, you know, those people on TV that, you know, do martial arts, I could never do that, go join the martial arts club. Like, you just never know, you know, you might get really good at something that you would never have dreamed of doing, and if you just don't try it. You're at the age and the stage now where everything's open. You know, like you can try anything. And I guarantee you that no matter what you do, even if you're not good at it, and even if you realize, okay, you know what, this really isn't for me. Maybe I'm not meant to be a triathlete, or maybe I'm not meant to be, you know, the chess club champion or whatever. You're gonna learn something from that. And you can take that experience and you take that knowledge and bring it forward. So you're never gonna go backwards. You're always gonna keep moving forward.
I would totally agree with that. Try something new. Sometimes you don't need a reason. If you're just interested, just go try it. You'll have surprises. And also reading. I know I said I'm not going to be a writer, but it doesn't mean I don't like to read books. I think every good books, you will learn. It's like you're living 1,000 different lives, right? You learn to look at the world or the society, different cultures from very different perspectives. That gives you a view of the world that's more complex. And I would say one of the reasons for bias to be formed is narrow vision. And through reading, possibly you don't have to travel around the world, but you will have opportunity to let your imagination or other people's life experience to see the world.
I agree with all of those, and I would have said all of those. And I want to add one more, which is just meet people, because people, go do things where you're going to meet people, because the network that I built in the beginning when I was starting my company has helped support us so much to get us to where we are now. And I would just, I went to the Canadian Wind Energy Conference, and I was terrified because I didn't know anybody. I was one of the very few women there, let alone I was really young. But I just went up to people and started talking to them, and I was terrified. But I met so many good people that have helped us over the years that without them, we would be much farther behind.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Siona. I am from Victoria Park Collegiate. And I heard you talking about your challenges and the obstacles that you overcame. And I know that you have to pick yourself back up and keep moving forward, but it's hard to do that. So could you give any tips on how you deal with the setbacks from either your professional life or dealing with being a woman in science?
Go ahead. Go.
I think there are no mistakes. I think that everything is just an opportunity. If something doesn't go well, it's an opportunity to learn something. And you have to see it that way. There's never a problem that can't be fixed, which is something that I tell my team quite a bit when stuff goes wrong. There's always a solution, and if you look at it that way, and if you look at it as an opportunity, it helps to pick yourself back up.
I think one of the most important things, and especially for people like me, who are used to being, top of the class all the time and always succeeding and getting A's and everything, and that's, the typical pre-med sort of mentality. It's very hard to face failure, and it's very hard to, kind of swallow that. And like you're right, pick yourself back up. Anticipate failure. Expect that you're going to fail. And don't let that, even if it pulls you down, and even if you need a weekend where you're just basically at home in your PJs eating ice cream and watching Netflix, that's okay, as long as you've learned from it, because then you can keep moving forward. If you need that time for yourself, it's okay. It's okay to fail. From my failures, I've learned far more than I did from my successes, because I succeeded at that, that's great, it's over. It's what didn't work, what did I do wrong, how can I make it better, and how can I be better at what it is that I do. And so those are the best teaching moments I can think of. So don't be afraid, and prepare for it, anticipate it. Yes, you're gonna fail, and it's okay.
What I want to add to that is, nowadays social media is everywhere, right? So you see a lot of growing images or happiness in other people's life. You might sometimes think, I'm the only one who's suffering from this setback. Everybody suffers that. And then my approach is I basically sit back, okay, this is bad, but not end of the world. And then you go back to whatever you need to do. If you really think about it, I look back like I'm old, like during the last 40-some years, a lot of bad things happened. But now I look back, it's actually not that bad. So just have patience and do what your big goals, like you have a long range, long life ahead of you. The little setbacks, they will pass. Just be patient.
Thank you.
I'm Julia from St. David's, and I was just wondering, how did you guys discover what you loved? You guys say, do what you love for your job, but how did you know what you wanted to do?
Well, ever since I was a child, if I take something apart and put it together, I'm happy. So that's basically it. I think if you really kind of monitor it, feel see how you feel, you will tell. You do certain things, you get happiness out of it, right? See, in the lab as a researcher, we can be stuck in a problem for months. But the happiness when something is solved at the end of 4 months of hard work, there's no match, there's nothing else can match that happiness. Then this is what you want to do. Yeah, just feel it.
And there's nothing wrong with not knowing either, because sometimes the right stuff will happen. Or you'll try something and you'll realize, yeah, I don't like it, or yeah, I really like it. And then you'll know, and there's nothing wrong. I was really stressed out about choosing the right degree when I left high school, and I think I would have enjoyed any of them. I loved the one that I picked, but if I wouldn't have liked it, I could have switched. I have a few people who work in my company and a few friends that ended up doing a second degree because they completed one degree, tried working in that field, realized they didn't like it, and went back to school. And it wasn't a setback for them at all, because I see how they bring their previous degree into the engineering that they do and how much it helps them. So there's nothing wrong with not knowing, because you'll find it eventually.
Thank you.
We had one more question from our West Humber students online. And one student was asking, how can you combine science and art? Camille, maybe that's something you might like to speak
yes.
to. Yeah.
I was thinking that actually as I was sitting here and I was just going through my work day, because I think a lot of people when they think of architecture just think of the building, but so I was working on a tower for downtown Toronto. So when you see the Scotiabank tower come up, just think behind that. But with science right now, because everyone talks about cars, being one of the bigger polluters, but buildings are also use a lot of fossil fuels and are also wasteful. So we have to be more mindful of what materials we use to save energy, convert energy, and that comes down to the building facade, of how much light goes into a building and how you use the space. So your design starts, your sustainability starts with the design itself, your sun orientation, and also to use passive and design approaches so that you're not pumping your building with heat and electricity and cooling and air conditioning at the end of the day. So so with a tower downtown and design, it's Windy City if you're ever in downtown Toronto. So we're designing a terrace on the 11th floor within the financial district. Therefore, if you're gonna go out on this patio, wind is gonna get you. So we have to do wind screens and we have wind consultants and engineers telling us the level and speed that the wind is coming down the side of the tower, and how do you design a screen and the perforation of that screen to mitigate that wind so that it becomes a comfortable space. So that's one part. And then, and drainage, all these slopes and angles and space, just space generally. You're trying to be the most resourceful use of space, because every square foot is $1 spent on, especially commercial space, that you have to be wise with your design, that every corner is a usable space for that building as well.
Awesome, thank you. Well, we've come to the end of our panel, but to close, I'd like to ask each of you if you have any closing words of wisdom for our audience today. Maybe think back to when you were in high school. If you could go back and tell yourself something when you were younger, what would you tell your young self? Or anything you'd like these young ladies to know?
I think for me, it's don't be afraid. To do something completely different, to do something that you are afraid of. And that doesn't just apply to you at your stage. I'm terrified of heights, but I'm going to go do the edge walk around the tower this summer because I'm afraid of heights. Maybe I'll really enjoy it. I don't know. But even at my stage, I'm still learning, and I'm still, trying new things and trying to see things differently. So in order to do that, you need a little bit of courage, and sometimes it just takes a few seconds, and next thing you know, your whole life can change. So like I said, just don't be afraid.
Okay, one advice. I would say you guys are very young. I would suggest you not to focus too much on your personal success. Don't set goals like, I want to be a professor by age 20-something. I want to gain become the top in my field by age 30-something. Because those are not fundamental. Focus on fundamental what you're interested in, what the social problems, what the engineering problems, scientific problems you are interested in solving, and persistently chasing after those dreams. In other words, not the position, not the awards, not the names, but the fundamental interesting science, engineering problems you want to address. That will drive you along your whole life. Don't worry about setbacks. Everyone have that. If you don't become the exactly point of life you designed to be, it's okay. You just keep going, and life is beautiful. Have faith, life is beautiful, and the many nice people around you to help you. And if you also try to help others along your way, you'll have actually a happier life than you just focus on your personal success.
I would say learn from every experience you have. So again, this area has a lot of co-op programs, but you can start that younger and get practical experience. And even if the experience is not what you thought, because I've had some jobs where it's like, this is horrible, but learn from that. Why is it horrible? Why is it bad? Why are you not enjoying yourself? And 15 years later, those jobs that I thought were bad, I'm referencing now and how I learned from them. So just be mindful of what, you may not be having fun at the time, but take apart your experience and be mindful of what you're learning and your approach. And it may not be the exact approach that you should or should not do, but learn from everything that you're at this point. And continue to learn. It's always good to learn.
Yes.
I would say don't be afraid to fail. And this is something that I learned from a young age. My father was an entrepreneur, and I saw him be extremely successful, but I also saw the success and failure that took along the way, and not every day went as planned, and there was some things that went badly, and in the end, he was still successful. And then when I was studying engineering, I had a professor tell me that my grades were really bad, and he said, you should probably just take the year off and then come back next year and try it again, and because you're probably not going to pass this year. I ended up passing, thank goodness, but things like that taught me a bit about failure. I think I still have a lot to learn about failure, but I'm not afraid. I wouldn't be afraid for my company to fail, because it would be a learning experience, and I know that I'll be successful. It'll maybe just be the next thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your time and your stories today. I'm sure there are probably lots of other burning questions sort of percolating in the audience, and I think most of the panelists will be here after our session, and so you should be able to see them in the atrium during the speed mentoring session, so you might have a chance to ask those questions one-on-one. Before I call the final speaker and we return to their seats, I'm also going to invite our mentors to head out into the atrium so that they can get ready for that next session. Thank you again, everyone, for our wonderful panelists. And you guys can go back to your seat. Our final speaker is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto and CEO of Braze Mobility. Pooja has completed doctoral and postdoctoral research in robotics and assistive technologies in British Columbia and Ontario, gaining almost a decade of experience developing and testing smart wheelchairs that could help prevent collisions and provide navigation assistance. Please join me in welcoming Pooja Viswanathan.
All right, hi everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I don't remember the last time I was in front of so many high school students, so this is really, really exciting. And I hope you'll enjoy me sharing a bit of my story today. So I'm going to go all the way back to the days when I was an undergrad in University of Waterloo, so not too far from here. I had started a bioinformatics program, so it was a Bachelor of Math program, honors computer science with the bioinformatics option, and I was doing co-op and all of that, so I was really enjoying myself. Mind you, my decision to go into bioinformatics was sort of an arbitrary one. I had no idea. I was one of those students who had no idea what program I wanted to do in undergrad, and I had applied to just about everything. I'd applied to business, I'd applied to accounting and engineering and computer science, and I ultimately settled on bioinformatics mainly because it sounded really, really cool. It was a very new field at the time, and also it allowed me to actually continue to take a lot of different courses because there was biology and chemistry and computer science and math. And I said, okay, this is great. I can still continue to do a lot of different things, and I don't need to necessarily focus on one. So I was doing this program, I was kind of enjoying myself, and I was walking through campus one day, and as everyone will know, when you're an undergrad student and you're on campus, you're always looking for one thing, and that's food. And when you're a broke undergrad student, the only thing that's better than seeing food is seeing free food. And so I decided, okay, this is great. I'm going to take a bit of a detour. I think I was on my way to class or something, so I said, no, I'm going to go eat this great food, and it was like a cuisine laid out there for me. So I went and started tasting. For those of you who are familiar with Waterloo, this was what we call the fishbowl. Anyone here familiar with Waterloo? Anyone from the Waterloo area here? Okay, so when you go to University of Waterloo, if you ever do, there's this thing called a fishbowl in DC, and so you can see right through it. So it's kind of like a glass tank that you can see through. And so I went in and started eating all this food, and just as I was about to leave after licking all the good food off my fingers, I decided to actually look around and see what was going on, what this event was that they'd been serving all this free food at. And it turned out that it was an assistive technology seminar. So this was I believe it was a systems design engineering course that had a design project, and all these students were building cool assistive technologies. So there were technologies there for people who were blind, people with mobility impairments. And so I stopped and looked at this and thought, this is really cool. I'd always had a passion for technology, and that's sort of why I also went into computer science. But I also liked the health aspects, which is why I went to bioinformatics. But one thing that I felt that I really wanted to do was actually build tangible things where I could see impacts right away on quality of life for people. And I thought, you know what, this is actually a great combination of all of those interests that I have. So I said, okay, let's explore this field of assistive technology. And so I went around, started networking, met with a lot of professors that were in this area, and ended up at the Intelligent Assistive Technology and Systems Lab at the University of Toronto. So I went there, and I was looking for a summer internship at this point. I was just wrapping up my degree. And there were two projects going on in this lab. So the one on the left was what was called a coach project. So this was a camera that would be installed in the bathroom that would be watching older adults with dementia washing their hands. Now, as some of you might know, people with dementia often forget things, so they might forget steps in a task like hand washing, which is actually fairly complex, because you got to get the soap, you got to wash your hands, you got to remember to turn off the tap. And so this system was essentially monitoring people as they were doing this task, and then if they found that the individual had forgotten a step, it would prompt them through either audio prompts or visual prompts. So that was the one project. And then there was a second project, which you see on the right, which was the Smart Wheelchair project. Now, in this project, there was an infrared camera that you can kind of see. I don't know if this one has a pointer on it, but okay, maybe not. You can kind of see it sticking up there on that white bar. But the camera was essentially monitoring obstacles in front of the wheelchair, and if the person got too close to an obstacle, it would automatically stop. So I looked at both of these projects, and I thought, well, the Smart Wheelchair project, I get to build this wheelchair robot thing, I get to crash test it, and they're going to pay me to crash this wheelchair. That sounded like an awesome idea, so I was like, all right, sign me up. I'm down for the Smart Wheelchair project. And at the time, it was really just something fun that I wanted to do and just seemed interesting, but it soon actually grew into a lot more than that. So I went to my first trip to a long-term care facility, and when I went there, I noticed that a lot of the residents were slumped over in these manual wheelchairs. So they were not strong enough to propel themselves, and so they were essentially slumped over. They couldn't really move themselves. They were often dependent on caregivers to push them around. And this really impacted their quality of life and their independence and their mobility. And so this really came across to me as essentially a violation of human rights, right? We all have the right to be mobile and independent, but there were a lot of issues. There were safety concerns. You know, if the staff gave them a power chair, a lot of these residents also had dementia. And so they could potentially cause harm to not only themselves, but others as well. And so I decided that this was more than just a little project that I'll work on in the summer, and decided to start a PhD research project on this topic. Now, hopefully, is there something I need to do to play the video? Do I just play it from here? So this is a capture of a real-life incident. This was a resident in Vancouver who was driving a power wheelchair and how he hated going to the grocery store. And because this is what actually happened. So this was an unintentional capture. There was a videographer following him around in the grocery store, and as you can see, as he was backing up, he didn't realize his chair caught the grocery shelf, and the whole thing just toppled over. And he's not alone in this. In fact, we've heard since then a lot of wheelchair users who face very similar issues. And so you can imagine the embarrassment and the loss of dignity. So all of this really inspired me to do my research. And so I flew off to beautiful British Columbia and went to the University of British Columbia there to start on this project. So I started in 2006, and it took me about 4 years to build what you see here. So this was a prototype of a smart wheelchair. It's got a camera in the front, a stereo vision camera, so it works just like the eyes. It tries to figure out how far things are, but it was also creating maps of the environment. So just like GPS, which doesn't actually work too well indoors, this this project essentially would involve the wheelchair being able to map the whole environment, being able to detect obstacles, and so if a person got too close, it'd be able to stop, but it'd also be able to prompt the person if they got lost. And so I went on to test that in this crazy maze setup that I made. So there's a bunch of boards there, and really what it is a maze where each user had to go from the back of the maze all the way out to the front and avoid all these obstacles along the way. And we're really looking to measure the difference between using my system and not. And so what you're seeing here is sort of a graph. The middle section is where my system's activated, and the outer two are where the system's not activated. And what you're seeing on the y-axis is the number of collisions. So as you can see with the system, people had a lot lower collisions than they had without the system. And we showed similar results for how quickly people were getting to the goal and all of that. So this was all great, and it was a proof of concept, but there were a few lessons that I learned from this project. So the first thing I learned is throughout the study, I was mainly collecting numbers, right? We were collecting numbers, crunching numbers, looking at number of collisions, looking at distance to the goal. But what I realized was numbers don't actually tell the whole story. We didn't have a very good sense of how people felt in these chairs, whether this was the kind of technology that people actually wanted, whether it would impact their lives. The other lesson that I learned was, it took me 4 years to develop this prototype, but I didn't actually engage with my users until that testing stage when I went into that maze. And so there was a lot of feedback that I got at the end of it that really would have been great to know right off the bat. And now I didn't have a lot of time to incorporate those results because I was pretty much at the end of my PhD research, and my professors wanted me to graduate and submit my thesis and move on. So it was a challenge because I'd learned all this great information, didn't quite know how to incorporate it. And the last question, which was the scariest thing for me, was where do we go from here? So what I'd showed was a proof of concept, and that technology like this could really impact people's lives. But with a lot of research projects, at the end of a project, the prototypes just end up getting shelved. Sometimes there's another student who might pick it up and sort of make some changes or add to it or maybe take it in another direction. But a lot of the times, research does end up staying in the lab and never actually gets out into the real world. And so that I was not okay with. And so I came back to Toronto to see what the options were and what I could do to take this kind of idea to market. And so over here, I came back, I started as a postdoctoral fellow, and then I started engaging with all of the people there in the community. So there was Toronto Rehab Institute, there was the accelerator. I'm part of the Impact Center Accelerator now, which is a campus-linked accelerator. So for those of you who don't know what an accelerator means, it's essentially an area that promotes startups. So you get a lot of startups that are supported in that sort of environment. So for us, we actually even get free hardware prototyping resources, so things like laser cutters and 3D printers and so on. So I was part of this great ecosystem, and I really want to take the idea to market, but it became very clear that if I needed to do that, I had to start a company. And I knew nothing about starting a company. So again, being part of this ecosystem really, really helped, because it meant that I could take free courses at Mars, so there's a lot of entrepreneurial courses there. Throughout the university, there were a lot of free workshops that I could take. And so little by little, I started sort of, having or increasing my own confidence in my ability to actually take an idea to market. And the result of that ended up being in 2016 when I incorporated Braze Mobility. So at Braze Mobility, what we're trying to do, and our mission, is to increase safety of not only the driver and the wheelchair user, but others in the environment as well. We're trying to reduce the burden and reliance on caregivers. And finally, we really want to empower users. We want to tackle those dignity and security issues that I showed you in that video to really make people feel empowered to make their own choices and to have the right to mobility, not privilege, but right to mobility. So these are just some numbers, but really they just go to show how big the market is, right? So the mobility aids market, so the market for devices like ours is over $1 billion. It's a big market, but there's still not a whole lot of options out there for our users. What we're focusing on is, the over 3 million wheelchair users, and that's just in US and Canada. So this is really a global problem, and we're starting small, but the numbers are big. The real advantage of the product that we've built is that it's affordable, and this was something that was very important to us. A lot of our customers who are wheelchair users often don't have a lot of disposable income, so it was really important that we build an affordable product. We've built many customizations and adaptability into the system, because our users are very diverse and they might have very different needs and abilities. So it's really important to adapt to that. And finally, we've established many strategic partnerships over the years as well. In fact, we've even worked with one of the largest wheelchair controller manufacturers in the world. So this is all really important. This is just a quick video of the system getting installed. So what we ended up building, so instead of making the whole chair smarter, we created an add-on that would just quickly add on to a wheelchair and essentially make it smarter. And what it offers is visual feedback through lights, audio feedback through a beeping sound, and a vibration feedback as well. So the vibration motors that you saw getting installed on the backrest, what that does is if the person gets too close to an obstacle, that part of the chair will actually vibrate. So it gives that sort of physical feedback as well. These are some of our products. So we launched kind of with two main products, what we call the Sentina and the Hydra, and they just have different uses. So one more for manual versus power, and the Hydra has more flexibility because it has a bunch of sensors that can be installed anywhere. The Sentina on the right essentially provides 180 degrees of coverage in the rear, and it can also be expanded to add on additional sensors. This is actually our latest version right here, so it's actually a lot smaller than the one that you see in the video. So this is the Sentina product, and we have these tiny little sensors that you see with the Hydra that can also be expanded with the Sentina, and it provides this different feedback. In fact, if I can hook it in quickly here, I can show you what it does. So I've turned off the audio feedback just so we don't get a lot of beeping here. But what you see is the lights coming on, so you can see as something gets close, it goes red. As something goes further away, it goes yellow, so on. So very intuitive kind of feedback. All right, so this is my team. So as I mentioned, so I'm the CEO of the company. My partner and co-founder is Professor Alex Miolaides, who's the head of the Robotics and AI Lab in Toronto Rehab and U of T as well. And we have a very diverse team. So we have people who do manufacturing, accessibility, design, and we also have wheelchair users on our team that really inform all aspects of the company, like marketing and research and development and so on. And we're supported by a whole bunch of organizations there that you see on the bottom. So in terms of what we've accomplished, we actually sold out our first production run in 2018, and these are just some examples of some of the partnerships and sort of institutions that we've sold to. There's a lot of validation going on of our product in Vancouver and Toronto, and we've been approached by some pretty large players in the space to sort of partner with us. And right now what we're working on is actually using our sensors to collect data about how people are driving, about how they can be safer, and there are a whole lot of people that are interested in this kind of data, and these are just some examples of that. So I just wanted to end with this last video.
I've been in a wheelchair just over 2 years.
I've been in a wheelchair for 25 years now. I injured myself in an ATV accident.
2 years ago on Christmas Eve, literally they dropped this wheelchair off to me. Within hours of me getting in this place, I had pretty much destroyed my apartment.
Done a lot of damage in my house and on my furniture and knocked a lot of things over unintentionally. And after a while you just start ignoring it because you're either constantly frustrated with the damage you do, and so now it's kind of like 2 or 3 dents in the wall a day is just normal.
To have a device back there that is literally watching my back is an amazing feeling.
When we added this sensor unit to the chair, it was just amazing it gives you an alert before you hit something, because you don't do it intentionally. Like I said, it lets you know where you are. When you're backing through a door frame, I can tell if I'm centered in the doorway because the sensor's detecting both doorposts as they go through.
So I can actually back out of there just by looking at the lights and no longer rip that. The door handle's actually been on there ever since this device has been on my wheelchair. It's never been taken off once, so that's a record for me. If this was taken off of my wheelchair now, I would feel totally exposed.
I think that anyone who's using a power chair would benefit from the situation, and there's even situations where it might be beneficial to someone in a manual chair, or even someone who's just has issues looking behind them.
Being in a wheelchair is the only time I ever felt, like I could become a victim. When I travel over Toronto, Montreal, it doesn't matter where I go, everything is in the backpack that is hanging off the back of this chair. Most of the time, once I've opened the zipper on the backpack, I can't close it or I can't close it all the way, who would be easier to prey on than somebody who can't even feel or know that they're back there. And that's, for me, that's one of the things I like most about having these sensors on the back of the chair. And I think this would be a huge confidence. It is for me, and I believe that it would be for a lot of people who just do not go out because, you know, they're that security issue and that dignity issue, where any device that gives you a piece of your dignity back and makes you feel a little bit more secure in your surroundings, well, that says it all to me right there.
So just some closing thoughts here. Really, and I put advice in quotes there because I don't think I give great advice, and I think the best mentors are the ones who don't actually give you advice and just ask you questions to help you find your own answers. But here's just some thoughts from what I went through. What I find is, and especially as someone who just had a lot of interest and didn't really know a lot of times what I needed to be doing, I think one thing that I found really useful was to find other people that were doing things that I thought I'd like to do. And what that did was, you know, sometimes I discovered that I loved it, and other times I discovered that I absolutely hated it. But it was great to actually just go out there and shadow other people that were doing those kinds of things. The second thing is, you know, as a high school student, a lot of you are maybe thinking about university, and some of you are stressed about it. You know, am I making the right decision? Am I going into the right program? One thing that I really learned is whether it's your high school experience, your undergrad experience, or your graduate or postgraduate experience, it really is what you make out of it. And so, you know, there's going to be tons of opportunities you find along the way. In fact, some of the most memorable moments for me in my PhDs and my postdoctoral studies were not just what happened in the classroom, but was a lot of the extracurricular activities I took on. You know, at one point I ran a robotics camp, which I loved, and that was one of the most memorable experiences for me. And that was completely sort of something that I did on the side, and I saw an opportunity and went for it. So make sure that, you know, if you do see an opportunity, jump on it. But if you don't see any opportunities, you might have to create some yourselves. The next thing there, really is keep an open mind and be comfortable, keep expanding that comfort zone, because for me right now, as someone who runs a company, I'm not comfortable at all. I have to do things every day that I have no idea how to do. I do things that, you know, where I have to manage books, I run a business, I do sales, which I've never done before. And so I'm constantly learning and growing, and don't be afraid to do that. Be willing to step out of that comfort zone and learn new things. And finally, have fun, because that really is important, and it really isn't about the destination, it is about the journey. So keep having fun, and I wish you all luck, the best of luck in whatever you guys choose to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. If there's any questions for Pooja, please don't hesitate to make your way down. I think we do have someone.
I was going to go back to my seat, but I found your topic very interesting anyway, so I might as well ask a question while I'm here. And so I just wanted to say it's super cool that you are a co-founder and a CEO of your own business, and I am really interested in business related things. So at the end of the day, what made you decide that you want to be independent and have your own business and relate that to the sciences?
Yeah, so to be very honest, I don't think if you'd asked me, even 5 years ago, I don't think I would have said that I would ever own my own business. It wasn't really, the goal for me was never to be a business owner. The goal was really to solve a problem. I was very passionate about the problem I was trying to solve, and it was very frustrating when I finished my PhD and I realized that there was still no company solving that problem. And it was sort of more, I didn't see another option. If I wasn't going to come up with a solution myself, I didn't see anybody else would. And despite the fact that it was absolutely terrifying and I had no clue how to do it, sometimes it really does boil down to, you have a passion, you really want to solve a problem, you got to just learn what you need to learn to solve it.
Thank you, that's a great answer.
Hi, my name is Julia. I'm from St. John's Kilmarnock School. And less on the business side, but with what you're doing now with mobility and the wheelchair, if you wanted to get into a field like that, would biomedical engineering be the right path to take in university?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a good option. You know, like I said, when I did my undergrad, I went to bioinformatics, and there wasn't actually a lot of human factors component in it at all. But you know, I think with these things, no matter what you choose, you'll always find that there's some gaps. So I run today a hardware software startup. My entire experience is in software. I had no hardware experience. And so to create the first prototype, I actually had to go out and learn, you know, through YouTube videos, through, you know, other sort of hardware engineers that were in the lab, and then ultimately, you know, ended up hiring people that could fill that gap so that I didn't have to learn everything myself. So really, I think, so in answer to your question, I think it's a great option. I also think that there will be, even if you do take that route, there will invariably be gaps that you still have that you will need to fill. And so I generally suggest don't stress about it too much. If you see a program and you really see that there's, you know, that it's something that you're going to learn some skill sets that you think you want to pursue later on, go for it, but don't also let that limit you, because you might finish that and realize that you don't want to do that at all and you want to do something else. There's still plenty of opportunity to go and learn new skills as well. So go for it. Don't be too stressed out about it, though.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Hazel. I'm from St. Mary's DCVI, and my question is just basically about how you found the social aspect of everything. So you're your own business owner now and everything, but high school, I'm assuming like you must have been very academically focused and all that sort of stuff. So when did you, or how did you learn how to speak in front of people and how to communicate with others and be your business owner and that kind of thing?
That's a really interesting question, because a lot of people wouldn't realize this about me, but I'm actually very introverted. And I think it's also, the term introvert has been largely misrepresented. But, you know, I don't necessarily enjoy going out and being the first person talking. I don't enjoy the spotlight, which is ironic because I'm in the spotlight today. But, you know, I think there are a lot of things that you don't realize where you pick up skills. So I actually am a trained musician, and so I grew up performing on stage. So maybe that had something to do with it, where, you know, again, thanks to my parents' encouragement in that area, I did get used to performing on stage, singing on stage, and I did do a lot of public speaking. So I did Toastmasters, for example, which is, for those of you who know, is actually also a great organization. So if you're afraid of public speaking, that might be a great route to go. But I think with a lot of things, you know, a lot of these social aspects, I would say didn't necessarily come from the education in the classroom. It really came from interactions, came from friends, like friends who were really confident and spoke in ways that I really admired, and then you start emulating them, right? And I think all of that is really important. So in terms of speaking and that kind of thing, I think, you know, I never really learned how to speak in a classroom setting, but I think Toastmasters and performing and sort of mirroring those skills in my friends definitely helped.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just wanted to say to everybody else who spoke today, all of you wonderful scientists, it's awesome that you guys are all so good at speaking in front of people and just have that social skills too.
The microphone's kind of too high, so I'm not going to really try that. But my name's Shayla. I go to St. Thomas More, and I was just wondering, like, if you could go back a couple years, would you like change anything like differently about like the career path that like you took, like in forming into a business and all that? Like, would you go back and like redo anything?
Man, these are really tough questions. I think there's always things that you wish you did differently. But at the same time, I think I am where I am because of a lot of the choices that I made and a lot of the mistakes that I made. You know, if I hadn't gone through, like a lot of people ask me, well, you started this business, like, you know, did you really need to do a PhD program to do this? Maybe not. But there were so many things that I learned throughout my PhD program. There's so many skill sets that I learned, but also, like I said, things that outside of that. So as a postdoctoral fellow, for one of the main things I had to do is apply for grants, right? So a lot of people know as an academic, you often have to apply for government grants to get funding for your projects. That really helped me with raising funds for the company. Because again, I've had to apply for a lot of money for the company to governments. And so sometimes, you know, it's not really obvious to you, but you do end up having a lot of experiences along the way that really do guide where you end up. So I don't know that I would have really done too many things differently. I think I would always wish that, I kind of wish that I also had more experiences learning about some of the social aspects, so learning about long-term care facilities, for example, and how people live in long-term care. I didn't know that until pretty much the end of my undergrad degree. So in that sense, I think just getting out more into the real world and interacting more is always a good idea. And then you never know what you might pick up, and I think that's where you also might discover your calling sometimes, right? Because you might see something, you might see a problem, or you might see, some sort of human right that's being violated, and you might decide that that's what you want to work on for the rest of your life. So I think just getting out and not staying in a bubble, because that happens a lot, especially when people go the academic route. There is that danger that you're in a lab and you're in that academic environment and you lose track of what's going on in the real world. So I'd say always stay grounded and always stay connected to the world.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Pooja. Please thank Pooja again for her time. We've covered a lot of territory already today. Throughout the remaining part of today, and if there was anything that you felt inspiring or favorite moments from this morning, feel free to tweet and post about them using either Facebook or Twitter, as shown here. As we close our session in the theater this morning, I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, Linamar Corporation. Based in Guelph, Linamar is a multi-billion-dollar company operating 58 manufacturing facilities around the world. We thank them for supporting women in science and for their past and ongoing support for this event. For our online audience who joined us today, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the session. Please, let's take a moment to thank all of our speakers and the panelists for sharing their experiences today. For our audience in the theater, we'll now be moving to the speed mentoring part of our day. On the back of your program, there's a numbered list of speed mentors. And on the back of your name badge, you're going to find a number. There's a few changes that we've had. Haley Rutherford, who works in science communication, has stepped in to fill in a cancellation that we've had, and she's going to be at mentor station number 4. Unfortunately, we also had a last-minute illness, so our mentor at station 12 is not going to be able to make it today. So if you have number 12 on your name badge, you are free to choose one of the other stations to start. So just choose another station. How this is going to work is that you'll go to your first station, you'll have about 6 minutes there to talk to the mentor, and then I'm going to blow a loud referee whistle. It's quite loud, just to warn you. And at this point, you're going to move to the next station on your list. So if you're at number 1, you're going to move to number 2. If you're at number 2, you're going to move to number 3. And if you started at number 11, you're going to move then directly to station 1. So we're only going to have 11 stations. So if you're at number 11 when you start, you'll move to station number 1. We're going to have 4 short sessions. So we'll have 6 minutes at each of these 4 sessions. And then we're going to have, and you're going to move in sequence to the next station. And then we're going to have about 30 minutes more. And during this time, you're free to go to any of the stations that you want to. Or go back to a station that you really wanted to hear more from. Or you still have the opportunity to perhaps connect with our speakers that we've heard from today or panelists. I'll make announcements every 10 minutes so that you don't lose track of time, but that time is sort of an open session where you can float around and see who you would like. There's also going to be a snack and beverage station in the atrium, so if you're really hungry and you want to grab a bite, you can do that anytime during the mentoring session. And we'll have a wrap-up session today around noon. So how we're going to leave the auditorium now, just one more minute. We're going to exit through the ground floor door here on the left. You can leave your bags in this room, okay, if you would like, but don't leave valuables. You should take your valuables with you. Take a look at the number on your badge so you know exactly where you're going, and we can proceed.